Hello there, you're listening to The Planet's Memory, where time breathes and the Earth remembers. Close your eyes and imagine a world beneath the ice, a world frozen in time, waiting silently for millions of years beneath the coldest, most remote place on Earth. Imagine vast forests that once swayed in warm breezes, ancient creatures that roamed through lush valleys, and civilizations of life that thrived under skies we can barely comprehend today. Now imagine all of this preserved perfectly, locked away under miles of glacial ice in Antarctica, the last great frontier of our planet, a frozen vault holding secrets that could rewrite everything we know about life, evolution, and the history of Earth itself. Tonight, as you drift into the peaceful embrace of sleep, let us journey together to the bottom of the world, to a continent of ice and mystery, where scientists believe an entire lost world lies waiting, preserved like a time capsule from ages long forgotten. This is not just a story of ice and snow, but a tale of discovery, wonder, and the profound mysteries that still hide in the most unexpected places on our beautiful planet. Let the gentle rhythm of this story carry you softward into dreams as we explore what might lie beneath Antarctica's frozen surface, a world that could change everything we thought we knew. Antarctica stands alone at the bottom of our world, a massive continent covered almost entirely by ice, stretching across nearly 5.5 million square miles of Earth's southern pole. This is a place of extremes, where temperatures can plunge to nearly minus 130 degrees Fahrenheit, where winds howl at speeds that would knock a person off their feet, and where the sun disappears for months at a time, leaving the land in perpetual darkness during the long polar winter. Yet despite these harsh conditions, Antarctica holds a special place in the imagination of scientists, explorers, and dreamers alike, because beneath its frozen exterior lies a mystery so profound that it has captivated researchers for generations. The ice sheet that covers Antarctica is not merely a layer of frozen water, but rather an enormous archive, a natural library that has been collecting and preserving samples of Earth's history for millions upon millions of years. Every snowflake that has fallen on this continent for countless ages has been compressed and locked into the ice, creating layers upon layers of frozen time, each one holding clues about what the world was like when that snow first touched the ground. The ice sheet itself is a marvel of nature, averaging more than a mile in thickness across the entire continent, and in some places reaching depths of nearly 3 miles. To put this in perspective, if you were to stand at the surface of Antarctica and drill straight down through the ice, you would pass through frozen layers that were formed when humans first walked the Earth, then continue through ice from the age of dinosaurs, and keep going deeper still into periods so ancient that life on land was just beginning to emerge from the oceans. The weight of all this ice is so immense that it has actually pressed the bedrock of Antarctica downward, creating depressions in the Earth's crust that lie far below sea level. Scientists have discovered that if all the ice was somehow removed from Antarctica, the continent itself would slowly rise upward over thousands of years, rebounding from the enormous pressure that has been bearing down on it for so long. But within this massive frozen structure, trapped in the ice and preserved in the ancient bedrock below, may lie remnants of a world that existed before the ice came, a world that was warm, green, and teeming with life. The idea that Antarctica was once a very different place is not merely speculation or fantasy, but a conclusion drawn from decades of careful scientific research and discovery. Geologists and paleontologists have found fossils embedded in the rocks of Antarctica that tell an incredible story of transformation. These are not fossils of penguins or seals, the creatures we associate with Antarctica today, but rather fossils of plants and animals that could only have lived in much warmer climates. There are fossilized remains of trees that once grew tall and strong, their roots digging deep into soil that was rich and fertile. There are imprints of ferns and flowering plants, delicate leaves preserved in stone, showing intricate details of their structure as clearly as if they had been pressed into a book just yesterday. There are bones and teeth of dinosaurs, massive creatures that roamed across this land when it was part of a very different world, connected to other continents in configurations that would seem alien to us today. All of these discoveries point to an inescapable conclusion. Antarctica was not always the frozen wasteland we know today. but was once a place of abundant life, where the climate was mild or even warm, and where ecosystems flourished in ways that seem almost impossible when we look at the ice-covered continent of the present day. To understand how Antarctica could have been so dramatically different from what it is today, we must travel back in time, not just hundreds or thousands of years, but millions and tens of millions of years into Earth's deep past. During a period that geologists call the Cretaceous, which lasted from about 145 million years ago until 66 million years ago, the Earth was a much warmer place overall. There were no polar ice caps, and sea levels were significantly higher than they are today, flooding many of the low-lying areas of the continents and creating shallow seas that stretched across vast regions. The climate was so warm during much of this time that palm trees grew in what is now Alaska, and dinosaurs thrived in regions that today are covered by ice and snow for most of the year. Antarctica during this period was not positioned exactly where it is today, because the continents have been slowly drifting across the surface of the Earth throughout history, pushed and pulled by the movement of massive tectonic plates beneath them. But even though Antarctica was located in the southern polar region, the global climate was warm enough that ice did not accumulate there, and instead the continent was covered with forests, rivers, and perhaps even lakes and wetlands. Scientists have pieced together what this ancient Antarctica might have looked like by studying the fossilized remains that have been discovered there, and by using computer models to simulate the climate conditions of the past. They envision a landscape that would have been utterly unrecognizable to anyone who has seen the icy continent of today. Instead of endless white plains of snow and ice, there would have been dense forests of conifers and southern beech trees, their branches forming a canopy that filtered the sunlight and created a dappled pattern on the forest floor below. Ferns and mosses would have carpeted the ground, growing thick in the moist environment, and flowering plants would have added splashes of colour to the predominantly green landscape. Rivers would have carved their way through the terrain, carrying water from higher elevations down to the coast, where they would have emptied into the surrounding ocean. Along these waterways, animals would have gathered to drink and feed, creating ecosystems that were complex and interconnected in the same way that modern ecosystems function today. The animal life of this ancient Antarctica would have been dominated by dinosaurs, as these magnificent creatures ruled the Earth during the Cretaceous period. Paleontologists have found fossilized bones of dinosaurs in Antarctica that provide tantalizing glimpses of what species lived there. There were plant-eating dinosaurs that would have browsed on the vegetation, stripping leaves from branches and munching on ferns and other low-growing plants. There were also predatory dinosaurs, carnivores that hunted the herbivores, using their sharp teeth and claws to bring down prey. The specific species that lived in Antarctica were often unique to the southern continents, because at that time the land masses of the southern hemisphere were still connected, or at least much closer together than they are today, forming a supercontinent that scientists call Gondwana. This meant that animals and plants could migrate between what is now South America, Africa, India, Australia, and Antarctica, creating a shared flora and fauna across these regions. But as the continents continued to drift apart over millions of years, each region began to develop its own distinct ecosystems, and the species that were isolated on Antarctica would have evolved in their own unique ways. Beyond the dinosaurs, there would have been many other forms of life in this ancient Antarctic world. Insects would have buzzed through the air, pollinating flowers and feeding on plant matter, while amphibians and perhaps early mammals would have lived in the undergrowth and along the water's edge. In the rivers and coastal waters, fish and marine reptiles would have swum, hunting for food and navigating the currents. Birds or their ancestors may have been present as well, filling the skies with their calls and nesting in the trees and cliffs. This was a world that was fully alive, a functioning ecosystem where every organism played a role in the great web of life. It was a world that persisted for millions of years, changing slowly as evolution shaped the species and as the environment itself underwent subtle shifts. But then, something dramatic happened. Something that would transform Antarctica from a green and living land into the frozen desert we know today, and in the process, it may have trapped and preserved remnants of that lost world beneath the ice. The transition from a green Antarctica to a frozen one did not happen overnight, but rather unfolded over millions of years as the result of gradual but profound changes in Earth's climate and the position of the continents. The story of this great freeze is complex, involving the interplay of many different factors, from the movement of tectonic plates to changes in ocean currents, atmospheric composition, and the amount of sunlight reaching different parts of the planet. Understanding how Antarctica became covered in ice requires us to think about Earth as a dynamic system, where everything is connected and where changes in one part of the world can have far-reaching effects on distant regions. The transformation of Antarctica is one of the most dramatic examples of climate change in Earth's history, and it offers important lessons about how our planet's climate can shift over time, sometimes gradually and sometimes with surprising speed. One of the key factors that led to the freezing of Antarctica was the breakup of the ancient supercontinent Gondwana and the subsequent drift of the continents into new positions. As the land masses that had been connected for so long began to separate, Antarctica gradually moved into a position centered over the South Pole, becoming more isolated from the other continents. This isolation had important consequences for the climate of Antarctica, and indeed for the entire planet. When Antarctica was still connected to other land masses, warm ocean currents from tropical regions could flow southward and bring heat to the Antarctic coast, helping to keep the climate relatively mild. But as the continents separated and Antarctica became surrounded by open ocean, a powerful ocean current developed that circled the continent, flowing from west to east in a great loop that scientists now call the Antarctic Circumpolar Current. This current acts like a barrier, preventing warm water from lower latitudes from reaching the Antarctic coast, and instead keeping the cold water trapped around the continent. The result was that Antarctica became thermally isolated, cut off from the warming influence of the rest of the world's oceans. At the same time that Antarctica was becoming isolated by ocean currents, changes were occurring in the atmosphere that also contributed to the cooling of the planet. During the warm periods of Earth's history, such as the Cretaceous, the atmosphere contained much higher concentrations of carbon dioxide than it does today. Carbon dioxide is a greenhouse gas, meaning that it traps heat in the atmosphere and keeps the planet warmer than it would otherwise be. The high levels of carbon dioxide during the Cretaceous were partly the result of volcanic activity, which released large amounts of this gas into the air, and partly the result of other natural processes that cycled carbon between the rocks, the oceans, the atmosphere, and living organisms. But over time, as volcanic activity decreased in some regions, and as plants and marine organisms removed carbon dioxide from the atmosphere through photosynthesis and other processes, the concentration of this greenhouse gas began to decline. With less carbon dioxide to trap heat, the planet's overall temperature began to drop, and regions that had once been warm enough to support lush vegetation started to become colder. The cooling of Antarctica was not a smooth or steady process, but rather occurred in fits and starts, with periods of warmth interspersed with periods of increasing cold. Scientists have studied ice cores drilled from the Antarctic ice sheet, which contain trapped bubbles of ancient air, and these cores reveal a complex history of temperature fluctuations over millions of years. There were times when the ice sheet grew larger and times when it shrank back, responding to changes in Earth's orbit around the Sun, variations in ocean currents, and other factors. But the overall trend was toward increasing cold and the accumulation of more and more ice. Snow that fell on the continent no longer melted away during the summer, but instead remained year-round, gradually compacting under its own weight and transforming into glacial ice. Layer upon layer of snow accumulated year after year, century after century, millennium after millennium, until the ice sheet grew to be miles thick, covering nearly the entire continent and burying the landscapes that had once been green and alive. As the ice sheet grew, it transformed Antarctica in profound ways. Rivers that had flowed for millions of years were frozen solid or buried beneath the ice. Forests that had stood for countless generations were crushed under the weight of the advancing glaciers. The animals that had roamed the land either migrated to warmer regions as the climate changed or perished, their remains becoming entombed in the ice or preserved in the rocks below. The Antarctica that had been a land of life became a land of ice, a frozen wilderness where only the hardiest organisms could survive, clinging to existence in the few ice-free areas along the coast or in the surrounding ocean. But the ice sheet that covered this lost world did not simply erase it, but rather preserved it, locking away evidence of what had once been there, holding it in a state of suspended animation, waiting for the day when humans would develop the technology and the curiosity to drill down through the ice and discover what secrets lay hidden below. For much of human history, Antarctica was completely unknown, a blank space on maps, a place of speculation and myth. Ancient geographers theorized that there must be a great southern continent to balance the known land masses of the north, but no one had ever seen it or set foot upon it. It was not until the early 19th century that explorers finally confirmed the existence of Antarctica, sailing through treacherous seas filled with icebergs and battling fierce storms to catch glimpses of the frozen coast. Even then, the interior of the continent remained a mystery, hidden behind walls of ice and protected by one of the harshest climates on Earth. For over a century after its discovery, Antarctica remained largely unexplored, visited only by a handful of brave adventurers who established camps along the coast and made short expeditions inland. These early explorers had no way of knowing what lay beneath the ice, no way of seeing through the miles of frozen water to the bedrock below. They could only measure the thickness of the ice in a few locations and speculate about what the shape of the land might be. All of that began to change in the middle of the 20th century, with the development of new technologies that allowed scientists to peer beneath the ice without having to physically drill through it. One of the most important of these technologies was radar, which uses radio waves to probe the subsurface. By flying aircraft equipped with ice-penetrating radar over Antarctica, researchers could send radio signals down through the ice and measure how long it took for the signals to bounce back from the bedrock below. Because radio waves travel at a known speed through ice, the time it took for the signal to return could be used to calculate the thickness of the ice at any given location. By collecting thousands upon thousands of these measurements across the continent, scientists gradually built up a picture of what the bedrock topography of Antarctica looked like, revealing a hidden landscape that had been concealed beneath the ice for millions of years. What these radar surveys revealed was nothing short of astonishing. Far from being a smooth, flat surface buried beneath the ice, the bedrock of Antarctica turned out to be incredibly varied and complex, with mountain ranges, valleys, plains, and deep basins that in some places lay thousands of feet below sea level. There were mountain peaks that rose nearly to the surface of the ice, creating subtle bumps and ridges that could just barely be detected from above. There were vast valleys that had been carved by ancient rivers, their courses still visible in the shape of the bedrock, even though no water had flowed through them for millions of years. There were enormous basins, some of them larger than entire countries, that had been excavated by glaciers or created by tectonic activity, and which now lay filled with ice nearly 2 miles thick. And most intriguingly, there were features that suggested the presence of ancient lakes and wetlands, places where water had once pooled on the surface before the ice came and transformed the landscape forever. One of the most remarkable discoveries made through these radar surveys was the existence of subglacial lakes, bodies of liquid water that exist beneath the ice sheet even today. These lakes form because the immense pressure of the ice above and the heat from Earth's interior below create conditions where water can remain liquid despite the frigid temperatures at the surface. Some of these subglacial lakes are enormous, such as Lake Vostok, which lies beneath more than 2 miles of ice in East Antarctica and is approximately the size of Lake Ontario, one of the Great Lakes of North America. The discovery of these lakes raised fascinating questions about what might be living in them, because they represent environments that have been isolated from the surface world for potentially millions of years. Cut off from sunlight and from the exchange of gases with the atmosphere, could there be microbial life in these lakes, organisms that have evolved in complete isolation, adapted to survive in the cold, dark, high-pressure environment beneath the ice? And if life could persist in such extreme conditions, what might that tell us about the possibility of life existing in similarly harsh environments elsewhere in the universe, such as beneath the ice-covered moons of Jupiter and Saturn? But the subglacial lakes are not the only intriguing features hidden beneath Antarctica's ice. Scientists have also identified what appear to be ancient river systems, with networks of valleys that suggest water once flowed across the landscape in organized drainage patterns. These river valleys tell a story of a time when Antarctica had a very different climate, when rain or snowmelt would have collected into streams and rivers that carried water from the interior of the continent down to the coast. Some of these valleys are enormous, comparable in size to major river systems found on other continents today. Tracing these valleys using radar data, researchers can reconstruct what the hydrology of ancient Antarctica might have looked like, where the watersheds were, where the major rivers flowed, and where water would have pooled in lakes or wetlands. This kind of information is invaluable for understanding the ecosystems that existed before the ice because water is essential for life, and the distribution of water across the landscape would have determined where forests grew, where animals congregated, and where the most productive and diverse habitats were located. While radar and other remote sensing technologies have allowed scientists to map the hidden landscape beneath Antarctica's ice, the most direct and compelling evidence for what this continent was like in the past comes from fossils, the preserved remains of ancient organisms that have been discovered in the rocks of Antarctica. Every fossil tells a story, providing a tangible link to a time long gone, and the fossils found in Antarctica have revealed a history so rich and unexpected that they have fundamentally changed how scientists think about the evolution of life on Earth and the history of the planet's climate. These discoveries have not come easily, as the harsh conditions of Antarctica make fieldwork extremely challenging, and the areas where fossils can be found are often remote and difficult to access. But the rewards have been well worth the effort, as each new fossil discovery adds another piece to the puzzle of Antarctica's lost world. One of the most significant early fossil discoveries in Antarctica was made in the early 20th century by members of the Terra Nova expedition, led by the famous explorer Robert Falcon Scott. On their tragic return journey from the South Pole, Scott and his companions collected rock samples that contained fossilized plant remains, including impressions of leaves from an ancient plant called Glossopteris. This discovery was remarkable because Glossopteris was already known from fossils found in South America, Africa, India, and Australia, and its presence in Antarctica provided strong evidence that these continents had once been connected, forming the supercontinent of Gondwana. The fact that the same species of plant could be found on continents that are now separated by vast oceans was one of the key pieces of evidence that supported the theory of continental drift, the idea that the continents have moved over time, which later developed into the modern theory of plate tectonics. The Glossopteris fossils from Antarctica thus played an important role in revolutionizing our understanding of Earth's geology. In the decades since that early discovery, paleontologists have found many more plant fossils in Antarctica, painting an increasingly detailed picture of the vegetation that once covered the continent. There are fossils of conifers, trees similar to modern pines and spruces, which would have formed extensive forests across the landscape. There are fossils of southern beech trees, which today are found in South America, Australia, and New Zealand, but which once grew in Antarctica as well, suggesting that the climate was temperate and moist, suitable for these types of trees. There are fossils of ferns, mosses, and liverworts, plants that thrive in shady, humid environments, indicating that the forests of ancient Antarctica had a well-developed understory where these smaller plants could grow. And there are fossils of flowering plants, which first appeared on Earth during the Cretaceous period and rapidly diversified to become the dominant form of vegetation in many ecosystems. The presence of flowering plant fossils in Antarctica shows that this continent was part of the great evolutionary radiation of these plants, and that the ecosystems here were keeping pace with changes happening elsewhere in the world. But perhaps the most exciting fossil discoveries in Antarctica have been those of animals, particularly dinosaurs. The first dinosaur fossils from Antarctica were not found until the late 20th century, but since then, several important species have been identified. One of the most notable is Cryolophosaurus, a large predatory dinosaur that lived during the early Jurassic period, about 190 million years ago. Cryolophosaurus was a fearsome carnivore, measuring more than 20 feet in length, with powerful jaws and sharp teeth designed for tearing flesh. The discovery of this dinosaur in Antarctica showed that even during the Jurassic, when the continent was located closer to the South Pole than it is today, and would have experienced long periods of darkness during the winter, large predators could thrive there, presumably feeding on the plant-eating dinosaurs that also lived in the region. The fossils of Cryolophosaurus were found in rocks high up in the Transantarctic Mountains, a mountain range that stretches across the continent, and the process of excavating and studying these fossils was extremely challenging due to the remote location and harsh weather conditions. In addition to Cryolophosaurus, paleontologists have found fossils of other dinosaurs in Antarctica, including plant-eating species and smaller carnivores, as well as fossils of other reptiles such as marine reptiles that lived in the seas surrounding the continent, There are fossils of plesiosaurs, long-necked marine reptiles that swam through the oceans hunting for fish, and fossils of mosasaurs, another group of marine reptiles that were formidable predators in the late Cretaceous seas. These marine fossils are often found in sedimentary rocks that were deposited on the ocean floor millions of years ago and have since been uplifted by tectonic forces to form part of the land we see today. Each of these fossils provides a glimpse into the complex ecosystems that existed in and around Antarctica during different periods of Earth's history, showing that this was not a barren or lifeless place, but rather a vibrant part of the global biosphere. Beyond dinosaurs and marine reptiles, there are also fossils of mammals that lived in Antarctica during the time after the dinosaurs went extinct. During the early part of the Cenozoic era, which began about 66 million years ago, after the asteroid impact that wiped out the non-avian dinosaurs, Antarctica was still relatively warm and was home to mammals that evolved to fill the ecological niches left vacant by the dinosaurs. Fossils of marsupials, the group of mammals that includes kangaroos and opossums, have been found in Antarctica, showing that these animals were once widespread across the southern continents. There are also fossils of early ancestors of modern groups of mammals, showing that Antarctica played a role in the evolutionary history of many animal lineages. As the climate gradually cooled over the course of the Cenozoic, these mammals would have faced increasing challenges, and eventually, as the ice began to take over, they would have either migrated to warmer regions or gone extinct. While the fossil record provides clear evidence of what life in Antarctica was like in the distant past, one of the most intriguing questions that scientists are grappling with today is whether life might still exist beneath the ice, not just in the fossils but as living organisms in the subglacial lakes and other hidden environments. The discovery of subglacial lakes beneath Antarctica's ice sheet raised the tantalizing possibility that these isolated bodies of water might harbour life, because wherever there is liquid water on Earth there tends to be life, even in the most extreme environments. The question is whether the conditions in these subglacial lakes are suitable for life, and if so, what kinds of organisms might be living there and how they survive in such a harsh and isolated environment. The conditions in subglacial lakes are extreme by almost any measure. The water is extremely cold, hovering just above the freezing point, and the lakes are under immense pressure from the weight of the ice above. They're completely dark because no sunlight can penetrate through miles of ice, which means that photosynthesis is impossible, and any life that exists there must rely on other sources of energy. The lakes are also isolated from the surface, cut off from the exchange of gases like oxygen, and from the input of organic matter that would normally come from plants and animals living above. Despite these challenges, scientists believe that life could potentially exist in these lakes, because there are known examples on Earth of microorganisms that thrive in similarly extreme environments. There are bacteria and archaea, single-celled organisms that are among the simplest forms of life, that live in deep ocean vents where the water is superheated and under tremendous pressure, in acidic hot springs that would be lethal to most organisms, and even miles beneath the surface of the Earth in cracks in the bedrock where they feed on minerals and gases from the rocks. If life does exist in Antarctica's subglacial lakes, it would most likely be microbial, consisting of bacteria, archaea, or perhaps simple eukaryotic organisms like algae or protozoa. These organisms would need to obtain energy from sources other than sunlight, and scientists speculate that they might rely on chemosynthesis, a process where organisms derive energy from chemical reactions, involving minerals or gases dissolved in the water. For example, some bacteria can oxidize iron or sulfur compounds to obtain energy, while others can use hydrogen gas or methane. In a subglacial lake, these chemicals might be supplied by reactions between the water and the bedrock below, or by volcanic activity beneath the ice, which is known to occur in some parts of Antarctica. The organisms would also need nutrients like nitrogen and phosphorus, which could potentially be supplied by the slow breakdown of minerals or by organic matter that was buried when the ice formed and has been gradually leaching into the water over millions of years. To investigate whether life exists in these subglacial lakes, scientists have undertaken ambitious and technically challenging expeditions to drill through the ice and collect samples of the water. One of the first successful attempts to sample a subglacial lake was carried out by Russian scientists at Lake Vostok, where they drilled down through more than 2 miles of ice to reach the liquid water below. However, the drilling process used a technique that involved keeping the borehole from freezing by filling it with drilling fluid, which raised concerns about contamination, because any organisms brought up from the lake might actually be contaminants from the drilling fluid rather than native inhabitants of the lake. Despite these concerns, the samples did contain genetic material from bacteria, suggesting that there might indeed be microbial life in the lake, although the results remain somewhat controversial. More recently, American and British research teams have developed cleaner drilling techniques that minimize the risk of contamination, and they have successfully sampled other subglacial lakes. In samples taken from Lake Whillans, a smaller subglacial lake in West Antarctica, scientists found clear evidence of a thriving microbial community, with thousands of bacterial cells per milliliter of water and genetic sequences representing a diverse array of different species. These bacteria appear to be obtaining energy from the oxidation of minerals, confirming that chemosynthesis can indeed support life in the dark, isolated environment beneath the ice. The discovery of life in Lake Whillans and potentially in other subglacial lakes has profound implications, not only for our understanding of the limits of life on Earth, but also for the search for life on other worlds, because it shows that life can persist in environments that seem utterly inhospitable, as long as there is liquid water and a source of chemical energy. The existence of life in subglacial lakes also raises important questions about how long this life has been there, and whether it has been isolated for millions of years, or whether there is some exchange with the surface world. If the microbes in these lakes have truly been cut off from the rest of the biosphere for millions of years, they would have evolved in isolation, potentially developing unique characteristics and adaptations that are not found in any other organisms on Earth. Studying these organisms could provide insights into how evolution proceeds in isolation, and how life adapts to extreme conditions. On the other hand, if there has been some connection between the subglacial lakes and the surface, perhaps through cracks in the ice or through the movement of water through the ice sheet, then the microbes might be more closely related to organisms found elsewhere in Antarctica or in other parts of the world. Determining which of these scenarios is correct will require careful analysis of the genetic sequences of the organisms and comparison with known species from other environments. Beyond the subglacial lakes and the microbial life that may exist there today, the ice sheet itself holds within it a record of the ecosystems that existed on the surface of Antarctica before the ice came. As snow accumulated on the continent over millions of years, it trapped within it not just air bubbles, but also dust, pollen, microorganisms, and even larger organic particles that were present in the atmosphere at the time. These materials become incorporated into the ice as it forms, and they remain preserved there, locked in place by the cold, creating a frozen archive of environmental conditions that stretches back through time. By drilling ice cores, which are long cylinders of ice extracted from the ice sheet, scientists can access this archive and study the materials trapped within the ice, layer by layer, reconstructing a history of Antarctica's environment that spans hundreds of thousands or even millions of years. One of the most valuable types of information that can be obtained from ice cores is the concentration of gases in the ancient atmosphere, particularly carbon dioxide and methane, both of which are important greenhouse gases that influence Earth's climate. The air bubbles trapped in the ice contain samples of the atmosphere from the time when the snow fell, and by analysing these bubbles, scientists can measure how the concentration of these gases has changed over time. This information has been crucial for understanding the natural cycles of climate change that have occurred throughout Earth's history, including the ice ages, periods when the planet was much colder than it is today, and large ice sheets covered much of North America and Europe, and the interglacial periods, warmer times, when the ice retreated. The ice core records show that there is a close relationship between the concentration of greenhouse gases in the atmosphere and the global temperature, with higher concentrations corresponding to warmer periods and lower concentrations corresponding to colder periods. In addition to air bubbles, ice cores also contain dust and other particles that were blown onto the Antarctic ice sheet by the wind. By analysing this dust, scientists can learn about the conditions in other parts of the world because the dust can be transported over very long distances. For example, dust from the deserts of South America or Australia can be carried by wind currents all the way to Antarctica, and by studying the chemical composition and the grain size of this dust, researchers can infer what the climate was like in those source regions. Was it very dry, producing large amounts of dust, or was it wetter, with more vegetation to hold the soil in place? Were there more or fewer storms to lift the dust into the atmosphere and carry it across the oceans? All of these questions can be addressed by analysing the dust record in Antarctic ice cores. Perhaps even more intriguing is the possibility that ice cores might contain biological materials, such as pollen or spores, that were produced by plants in Antarctica or blown in from other continents. Pollen is extremely durable and can survive for millions of years if it is preserved in the right conditions. And because each type of plant produces a distinctive type of pollen, scientists can identify what plants were present in the environment by examining pollen grains under a microscope. If pollen from Antarctic plants is found in the ice cores, it would provide direct evidence of what vegetation was growing on the continent at different times in the past. So far, most ice cores from Antarctica have been drilled in the thick ice of the interior, where the ice is very old but where there is less likely to be biological material because the area was probably cold and barren even before the ice sheet formed. However, ice cores drilled closer to the coast, or in regions where the ice is thinner, might have a better chance of capturing pollen or other biological materials from the time when Antarctica was still green. There is also the possibility that the ice itself might contain frozen remains of organisms that were living on or near the surface when the ice formed. As the climate cooled and snow began to accumulate, plants and animals that were unable to migrate or adapt would have been buried by the snow and eventually frozen into the ice. If their remains were frozen quickly enough, and if the conditions were right, they might have been preserved in remarkable detail, just as mammoths and other Ice Age animals have been found preserved in the permafrost of Siberia. The difference is that the ice in Antarctica is much older than the permafrost in Siberia, potentially preserving organisms from millions of years ago rather than tens of thousands of years ago. The prospect of finding such frozen remains is tantalizing, because they could provide an unprecedented level of detail about the biology and ecology of ancient Antarctic life, potentially including soft tissues, DNA, and other biomolecules that are not preserved in fossils. To search for such frozen remains, scientists would need to drill ice cores or excavate ice in locations where there is reason to believe that the ice formed over areas that were once vegetated or inhabited by animals. This is not an easy task because the ice sheet is so thick, and because most of the continent is buried so deeply that it would be extremely expensive and time-consuming to drill down to the levels where such materials might be found. However, advances in drilling technology and in remote sensing techniques that can identify promising locations from the air or from satellite data are making such searches more feasible. In the coming years, it is possible that we will see expeditions specifically aimed at searching for biological materials frozen in the Antarctic ice, and if they are successful, the discoveries could be truly extraordinary, offering us a window into a lost world that has been hidden for millions of years. While the ice sheet is the dominant feature of Antarctica today, hidden beneath the ice are volcanoes, some of them active, that play an important role in shaping the subglacial environment and that may have influenced the history of life on the continent. Volcanic activity has been a constant feature of Earth throughout its history, and Antarctica is no exception. There are volcanoes along the coast of West Antarctica and beneath the ice sheet, and there is even an active volcano called Mount Erebus on Ross Island, which is one of the few places in the world where you can observe a lava lake, a pool of molten rock that is continuously present in the crater of the volcano. The heat from these volcanoes can melt the ice from below, creating subglacial lakes and rivers of meltwater that flow beneath the ice sheet, and the chemicals released by volcanic activity can provide nutrients and energy sources for any organisms that might be living in these hidden environments. The discovery of subglacial volcanoes in Antarctica has come relatively recently, as scientists have used radar and seismic techniques to map the bedrock beneath the ice. These studies have revealed that there are far more volcanoes beneath the Antarctic ice sheet than were previously known, with estimates suggesting that there could be as many as 100 or more volcanic peaks hidden beneath the ice. Some of these volcanoes may be extinct, having erupted millions of years ago and then gone dormant, but others could be active, with magma chambers beneath them that occasionally erupt, releasing lava, ash and gases into the subglacial environment. When a subglacial volcano erupts, it can melt a large amount of ice very quickly, creating a flood of meltwater that flows beneath the ice sheet and can even reach the ocean, carrying with it sediments and nutrients from the volcanic eruption. The presence of active volcanoes beneath the ice has important implications for understanding the stability of the Antarctic ice sheet and how it might respond to future climate change. If volcanic activity increases, it could accelerate the melting of the ice from below, potentially causing the ice sheet to thin or even collapse in certain areas. This is a concern because the collapse of large portions of the Antarctic ice sheet would lead to a significant rise in global sea levels, which would have profound impacts on coastal communities around the world. Scientists are working to better understand the distribution and activity level of subglacial volcanoes in Antarctica, using seismic monitoring and other techniques to detect signs of volcanic activity and to assess the risk that these volcanoes pose to the ice sheet. But beyond their potential to destabilize the ice sheet, subglacial volcanoes are also of great interest because they create unique habitats that could support life. The heat from a volcano can melt the ice and create a pocket of liquid water, and the volcanic activity releases minerals and gases into this water, including sulfur compounds, hydrogen, and carbon dioxide, all of which can be used by chemosynthetic microorganisms as sources of energy. In this way, subglacial volcanoes could create oases of life beneath the ice, isolated pockets where microbial communities thrive, fed by the chemical energy from the Earth's interior. These communities might be completely isolated from one another, each evolving independently in their own volcanic oasis, or there might be connections between them through the network of subglacial rivers and lakes that exist beneath the ice sheet. The idea that volcanic activity could support life beneath the Antarctic ice is not just of academic interest, but also has implications for the search for life elsewhere in the solar system. Several of the moons of the outer planets, particularly Europa, a moon of Jupiter, and Enceladus, a moon of Saturn, are believed to have subsurface oceans of liquid water beneath their icy crusts, and these oceans might be heated by volcanic or tidal activity, similar to the way that subglacial volcanoes heat the water beneath Antarctica's ice. If life can exist in the volcanic oases beneath the Antarctic ice, then it suggests that life might also be possible in the subsurface oceans of these distant moons, making them prime targets for future exploration missions. By studying the subglacial environment of Antarctica, scientists are not only learning about the history and biology of our own planet, but also preparing for the search for life beyond Earth. Antarctica's ice sheet is not just a relic of the past, a frozen archive of ancient climates and ecosystems, but is also a key player in the Earth's climate system today and in the future. The ice sheet contains about 90% of the world's ice and about 70% of the world's fresh water, and if it were to melt completely, it would raise global sea levels by more than 200 feet, enough to submerge most of the world's major coastal cities and to dramatically reshape the geography of the continents. While a complete melting of the Antarctic ice sheet is not expected to happen in the near future, even partial melting or the collapse of certain sections of the ice sheet could cause significant sea level rise, and there is growing concern among scientists that climate change caused by human activities is already beginning to affect the stability of the ice sheet. Over the past few decades, temperatures have been rising in many parts of Antarctica, particularly in the Antarctic Peninsula, the long arm of the continent that reaches up towards South America. This region has experienced some of the fastest warming on Earth, with average temperatures increasing by several degrees Celsius over the past 50 years. This warming has led to the collapse of several ice shelves, which are floating extensions of the ice sheet that fringe the continent. Ice shelves act like buttresses, holding back the glaciers on land and preventing them from flowing more quickly into the ocean. When an ice shelf collapses, the glaciers behind it can accelerate, flowing faster toward the sea and contributing more ice to the ocean, which raises sea levels. The collapse of the Larsenby ice shelf in 2002, which disintegrated over the course of just a few weeks, was a dramatic example of this process and a stark reminder of how quickly the ice in Antarctica can change. In addition to the warming of the air, the ocean around Antarctica is also warming, and warm ocean water is particularly effective at melting ice. When warm water comes into contact with the underside of ice shelves, or with the edges of glaciers that extend into the sea, it can cause rapid melting, thinning the ice and making it more susceptible to breaking apart. Some of the largest glaciers in Antarctica, particularly in West Antarctica, are grounded on bedrock that lies below sea level, and they are vulnerable to a process called marine ice sheet instability. If warm water melts the ice at the grounding line, the point where the glacier lifts off the bedrock and begins to float, the grounding line can retreat, causing the glacier to become unstable and potentially leading to a runaway collapse where the glacier flows more and more quickly into the ocean, accelerating the rate of sea level rise. The potential for significant sea level rise from the melting of Antarctica's ice sheet is one of the most serious consequences of climate change, and it is a topic of intense research and concern among scientists and policymakers. Understanding how the ice sheet has responded to climate change in the past is crucial for predicting how it will respond in the future. This is where the ice cores and the geological record become so important, because they provide a history of how the ice sheet has grown and shrunk over millions of years in response to natural variations in Earth's climate. By studying this history, scientists can identify tipping points, critical thresholds where small changes in climate can lead to large and rapid changes in the ice sheet. If we are approaching or have already crossed such a tipping point due to human-caused climate change, then the consequences could be severe, not just for Antarctica but for the entire planet. But there is also another, perhaps unexpected way in which the history of Antarctica's lost world is relevant to our understanding of climate change, and that is through the information it provides about how ecosystems respond to dramatic changes in climate. The transition from a green, living Antarctica to a frozen, barren one was one of the most extreme climate changes in Earth's history, and studying how the plants and animals of that time responded, how they adapted, migrated, or went extinct, can provide valuable lessons for understanding how modern ecosystems might respond to the rapid climate change that is occurring today. Are there certain types of organisms or ecosystems that are more resilient to change? Are there warning signs that can be detected before a system reaches a tipping point? How long does it take for ecosystems to recover after a major disruption? These are questions that are relevant not just to the past, but to the present and future as well. The exploration of Antarctica and the search for evidence of its lost world have been driven by remarkable advances in technology over the past few decades. From the early days of exploration, when adventurers relied on sled dogs and manual labour to cross the ice, to the present day, when scientists use satellites, aircraft, and sophisticated drilling equipment to study the continent, the tools available for Antarctic research have become increasingly powerful and precise. These technological advances have opened up new possibilities for discovery and have allowed researchers to ask and answer questions that would have been impossible to address just a generation ago. One of the most important technological developments has been the use of satellites to study Antarctica from space. Satellites equipped with a variety of sensors can measure the thickness of the ice, the speed at which glaciers are flowing, the temperature of the surface, and many other parameters that are crucial for understanding the ice sheet and how it is changing. Satellite radar can penetrate through clouds and operate in the darkness of the polar winter, providing continuous monitoring of the continent throughout the year. Satellite measurements have revealed that many of the glaciers in Antarctica are thinning and accelerating, providing some of the most compelling evidence that the ice sheet is responding to climate change. Satellites have also been used to discover new features beneath the ice, such as subglacial lakes, by detecting subtle changes in the elevation of the ice surface that indicate the presence of liquid water below. Another key technology is ice-penetrating radar, which, as mentioned earlier, is used to map the bedrock topography beneath the ice. Modern radar systems are far more sophisticated than the early versions, with higher resolution and the ability to detect finer details of the subglacial environment. Some radar systems can even distinguish between different types of materials beneath the ice, such as water, sediment, and bedrock, providing insights into the nature of the subglacial environment and the processes that are occurring there. Radar surveys are typically conducted from aircraft that fly back and forth over the ice in a grid pattern, collecting data that is then processed to create three-dimensional maps of the subsurface. These maps are invaluable for planning drilling operations because they allow scientists to identify locations where the ice is thinner or where there are interesting features such as subglacial lakes or ancient river valleys. Drilling technology has also advanced significantly, making it possible to extract ice cores from deeper in the ice sheet and to drill through the ice to reach the bedrock or subglacial lakes below. Modern drills can operate in extremely cold conditions and can penetrate through miles of ice, retrieving cores that are carefully preserved and transported back to laboratories for analysis. For drilling into subglacial lakes, special techniques have been developed to minimize contamination, using hot water or other methods to melt through the ice, and then collecting water samples with sterile equipment. The challenge is to ensure that no microorganisms or chemicals from the surface are introduced into the pristine subglacial environment, because even a tiny amount of contamination could compromise the scientific results, or, in a worst-case scenario, could introduce harmful organisms into an ecosystem that has been isolated for millions of years. In addition to these large-scale technologies, there have also been important advances in the analytical techniques used to study the samples collected from Antarctica. Genetic sequencing technology has become much faster and more affordable, making it possible to analyze the DNA of microorganisms in subglacial lakes, and to identify what species are present and how they are related to organisms found in other environments. Isotope analysis, which involves measuring the ratios of different isotopes of elements such as oxygen, carbon and nitrogen, can provide information about the temperature, the sources of water, and the metabolic processes of organisms. Microscopy techniques, including electron microscopy and atomic force microscopy, allow scientists to examine fossils and other materials at extremely high magnification, revealing details of cellular structure and even the arrangement of molecules within cells. All of these technological advances are contributing to a golden age of Antarctic research, where new discoveries are being made at a rapid pace, and where our understanding of this remote and mysterious continent is deepening with each passing year. But there is still so much that we do not know, so many questions that remain unanswered, and so many places in Antarctica that have never been explored. The continent is vast and the ice is thick, and the challenges of working in such a harsh environment are immense. Yet the allure of discovery, the desire to understand what lies hidden beneath the ice, continues to draw scientists from around the world to Antarctica, and the pace of exploration and research shows no signs of slowing down. As we push the boundaries of exploration and technology to uncover the secrets hidden beneath Antarctica's ice, we are also confronted with important ethical questions about how we conduct this research and what responsibilities we have to preserve this unique environment. Antarctica is protected by the Antarctic Treaty, an international agreement that was signed in 1959 and that designates the continent as a natural reserve devoted to peace and science. The treaty prohibits military activity, mineral mining, and nuclear testing in Antarctica, and it establishes guidelines for environmental protection and scientific cooperation. Under the treaty, all scientific research in Antarctica is supposed to be conducted in a way that minimizes environmental impact and that preserves the continent for future generations. One of the key ethical issues in Antarctic research is the question of contamination, particularly when it comes to drilling into subglacial lakes or other pristine environments that have been isolated from the surface for potentially millions of years. These environments are scientifically invaluable because they are natural laboratories where we can study how life adapts to extreme conditions and how ecosystems function in isolation. But they are also incredibly fragile, and introducing even a small amount of contamination could alter these environments irreversibly. Scientists who work in these areas must follow strict protocols to ensure that their equipment is sterile and that they do not introduce any foreign organisms or chemicals into the subglacial environment. This requires careful planning, rigorous testing of equipment, and sometimes the development of entirely new technologies that can operate under sterile conditions. There is also the question of whether we have the right to disturb these environments at all. Some people argue that there are certain places on Earth that should be left untouched, preserved in their natural state as a kind of sanctuary, and that drilling into subglacial lakes or excavating fossils from the ice is a form of intrusion that violates the integrity of these places. Others counter that the knowledge we gain from studying these environments is invaluable, not only for understanding the history of our own planet, but also for addressing pressing questions about climate change, the limits of life, and the possibility of life on other worlds. They argue that as long as the research is conducted responsibly and with minimal impact, the benefits outweigh the costs. This is a debate that has no easy answers, and it is one that the scientific community continues to grapple with as research in Antarctica becomes more ambitious and more technologically advanced. Another ethical consideration is the issue of access and benefit sharing. Antarctica does not belong to any one country, but rather is governed collectively by the nations that are party to the Antarctic Treaty. Scientific research in Antarctica requires significant resources, including funding, equipment, and logistical support. and not all countries have the capacity to conduct research there. This raises questions about equity and fairness. Should the benefits of Antarctic research, such as scientific discoveries, technological innovations, and even potential resources, be shared equally among all nations? Or do the countries that invest the most in research have a greater claim to the benefits? And what about future generations? Do we have a responsibility to ensure that Antarctica remains a place of scientific exploration and environmental preservation for our children and grandchildren? Or are we justified in exploiting the continent's resources if we need them to address challenges such as climate change or resource scarcity? These are complex questions that go beyond science and touch on issues of politics, economics, and values. They require careful thought and open dialogue among scientists, policymakers, and the public. As we continue to explore Antarctica and to uncover the secrets of its lost world, it is important that we do so with a sense of humility and responsibility, recognizing that we are dealing with something precious and irreplaceable, something that has taken millions of years to form and that, once disturbed, can never be exactly as it was before. The choices we make today about how we explore and protect Antarctica will have consequences that last far into the future, and it is up to us to ensure that those consequences are positive, that we leave Antarctica better than we found it, and that we preserve its wonders for all who come after us. One of the most exciting frontiers in the study of Antarctica's lost world is the search for ancient DNA, genetic material from organisms that lived millions of years ago and that may still be preserved in the ice, in sediments beneath the ice, or in fossils. DNA is the molecule that carries the genetic information for all living organisms, and it contains the instructions for building and operating every cell in an organism's body. When an organism dies, its DNA begins to break down, degraded by enzymes, bacteria, and environmental factors such as heat, moisture, and ultraviolet light. However, under certain conditions, particularly in very cold environments, DNA can persist for much longer than it normally would, sometimes for tens of thousands or even hundreds of thousands of years. The cold temperatures of Antarctica and the isolation of the subglacial environment make it one of the most promising places on Earth to search for ancient DNA. If ancient DNA can be recovered from Antarctic ice or sediments, it would be an extraordinary scientific achievement, because DNA contains far more information than can be obtained from fossils alone. Fossils can tell us about the shape and structure of an organism, and sometimes about its behavior or ecology. But DNA can tell us about the organism's evolutionary relationships, its genetic diversity, and even some aspects of its physiology and biochemistry. By sequencing ancient DNA and comparing it to the DNA of modern organisms, scientists can reconstruct evolutionary trees that show how different species are related to one another and how they have changed over time. They can also identify genes that were present in ancient organisms but that have been lost in their modern descendants, or vice versa, providing insights into how evolution has shaped the traits and capabilities of different lineages. The search for ancient DNA in Antarctica has already yielded some promising results. In sediment cores collected from the ocean floor around Antarctica, scientists have found fragments of DNA from plants, algae, and other organisms that lived in the region during warmer periods in the past. These DNA fragments are typically very short, just a few hundred or a few thousand base pairs in length, because the DNA has been broken into small pieces over time. However, even short fragments of DNA can be informative, because they can be matched against databases of known genetic sequences to identify what organism they came from. By analysing the DNA from these sediment cores, researchers have been able to reconstruct the composition of ancient ecosystems, showing what species were present at different times, and how the ecosystems changed as the climate cooled and the ice advanced. The ultimate goal for many researchers is to recover DNA from organisms that lived on Antarctica when it was still green, before the ice sheet formed. This would require finding ice or sediment that is millions of years old and that contains well-preserved biological materials. Such materials are most likely to be found in locations where the ice is very old and where the conditions have been stable for a long time, such as in the deep interior of East Antarctica, where the ice sheet has existed for millions of years. However, drilling into such ice is extremely challenging, both technically and logistically, and it is not yet clear whether DNA can survive for millions of years even under the best conditions. The oldest DNA that has been recovered so far from permafrost in Siberia is about 1 million years old, and it is heavily fragmented and degraded. Recovering DNA that is tens of millions of years old, from the time when dinosaurs roamed Antarctica, may simply not be possible, because the DNA may have broken down too much to be detected or sequenced. Even if DNA from the time of the dinosaurs cannot be recovered, there is still much that can be learned from DNA that is hundreds of thousands or a few million years old, from the period when Antarctica was transitioning from a green continent to a frozen one. During this time, there were plants and animals living on Antarctica, and their DNA could provide valuable information about how these organisms adapted to the cooling climate, and what ultimately happened to them as the ice advanced. Were there certain genetic adaptations that allowed some species to survive longer than others? Did populations become isolated and diverge genetically as the habitable areas shrank? Did any species manage to survive in refugia, small pockets of ice-free land where conditions remained suitable for life, even as the rest of the continent froze over? These are all questions that could potentially be addressed by studying ancient DNA from Antarctica. The concept of refugia, places where organisms can survive during periods of environmental stress or change, is an important one in ecology and evolutionary biology, and it may be particularly relevant to understanding the history of life in Antarctica. As the climate of Antarctica cooled and the ice sheet began to expand, the habitable areas for plants and animals would have gradually shrunk, confined to regions that remained ice-free or where the conditions were still suitable for life. These areas could have acted as refugia, places where populations of organisms persisted even as the rest of the continent became inhospitable. Over time, as the ice continued to advance, even these refugia might have been covered, but for a period they could have been oases of life in an increasingly frozen landscape. Evidence for refugia in Antarctica comes from several sources. One is the discovery of ice-free areas known as dry valleys in certain parts of the continent. The dry valleys of Antarctica are among the most extreme environments on Earth, with very low temperatures, extremely low humidity, and winds that can reach hurricane strength. Despite these harsh conditions, the valleys are ice-free because the climate is so dry that any snow that falls sublimates directly into water vapor rather than accumulating. The dry valleys contain rocks, sand, and gravel, and they have been studied extensively by scientists as analogues for the surface of Mars, because the conditions there are somewhat similar to what is found on the Red Planet, but the dry valleys also contain life, primarily in the form of microorganisms that live in the soil, under rocks, and in frozen lakes that exist in the valleys. These organisms are incredibly hardy, able to withstand desiccation, extreme cold, and intense ultraviolet radiation. The presence of life in the dry valleys suggests that even in the harshest parts of Antarctica, there are niches where organisms can survive, and it raises the question of whether similar refugia might have existed in the past, during the transition to a frozen continent. Perhaps there were valleys or coastal areas that remained ice-free for longer than the rest of Antarctica, where forests or other ecosystems persisted even as the ice sheet grew. If such refugia existed, they might have acted as stepping stones for organisms trying to migrate to other continents as the climate changed. Or they might have been the last places where certain species lived before finally going extinct. Identifying these refugia and understanding their role in the history of life in Antarctica is an active area of research, and it involves piecing together evidence from fossils, from the geological record, and from the distribution of modern organisms that may be descendants of ancient Antarctic lineages. There is also the intriguing possibility that some organisms might have survived beneath the ice, not just in subglacial lakes but in other types of refugia such as subglacial wetlands or geothermal areas heated by volcanic activity. If there are places beneath the ice where liquid water has persisted for millions of years and where conditions have remained stable, it is conceivable that populations of organisms could have survived there, evolving in isolation and adapting to the unique conditions of the subglacial environment. Such organisms would be relics of the lost world, direct descendants of the plants, animals, or microorganisms that lived on Antarctica before the ice, and their discovery would be one of the most extraordinary findings in the history of biology. While this might sound like science fiction, it is not entirely out of the realm of possibility, and it is something that scientists are keeping in mind as they explore the subglacial environment and search for signs of life. Antarctica's ice sheet and the lost world that lies beneath it provide a unique opportunity to study how life responds to extreme cold and isolation, and the lessons learned from Antarctica are directly applicable to the search for life on other planets and moons in our solar system. Several worlds in the outer solar system are covered with ice, and may have subsurface oceans or pockets of liquid water where life could potentially exist. The most prominent examples are Europa, a moon of Jupiter, and Enceladus, a moon of Saturn, both of which have icy surfaces and are believed to have oceans of liquid water beneath their crusts. These subsurface oceans are kept liquid by tidal heating, the friction generated as the moons are squeezed and stretched by the gravitational pull of their parent planets, and they may contain the basic ingredients for life: liquid water, organic molecules, and a source of energy. Europa is particularly intriguing because it is thought to have a global ocean that may be tens of miles deep, lying beneath an icy crust that is perhaps a few miles thick. The surface of Europa is covered with cracks and ridges, and there is evidence that the ice is relatively young, suggesting that there is active geological or hydrological activity that is resurfacing the moon. Some scientists have proposed that there might be hydrothermal vents on the floor of Europa's ocean, similar to the deep-sea vents found in Earth's oceans, where hot water and minerals are released from the interior of the moon. On Earth, hydrothermal vents support rich ecosystems of bacteria, tube worms, clams, and other organisms that do not rely on sunlight, but instead obtain energy from the chemicals in the vent fluids. If similar vents exist on Europa, they could potentially support life, and the subsurface ocean could be a vast ecosystem teeming with microorganisms or even more complex organisms. Enceladus is smaller than Europa, but it has captured the attention of scientists because it is actively venting water and organic molecules into space from geysers located at its south pole. The Cassini spacecraft, which orbited Saturn from 2004 until 2017, flew through these plumes and analysed their composition, finding water vapour, ice particles, salts, and complex organic molecules, including some that are associated with life on Earth. The discovery of these plumes showed that Enceladus has a subsurface ocean, and that the ocean is in contact with the rocky core of the moon, where water-rock interactions could be providing the chemical energy needed to support life. The plumes also provide a way to sample the ocean without having to drill through the ice, making Enceladus an attractive target for future missions aimed at searching for life. The study of Antarctica's subglacial environment is helping scientists prepare for the exploration of these distant icy worlds. By understanding how life can exist in the cold, dark, isolated conditions beneath Antarctica's ice, researchers are gaining insights into what types of organisms might be able to survive in the subsurface oceans of Europa or Enceladus. They are also developing and testing the technologies and techniques that will be needed to explore these worlds, from drilling through ice to detecting and analysing microorganisms in liquid water. In a sense, Antarctica is serving as a testing ground for the exploration of the outer solar system, a place where we can learn how to search for life in environments that are far beyond the reach of traditional exploration methods. The parallels between Antarctica and these icy moons go beyond just the scientific questions and extend to the philosophical and ethical dimensions as well. Just as we must grapple with questions about how to explore Antarctica responsibly, and whether we have the right to disturb pristine subglacial environments, we will face similar questions as we prepare to explore Europa, Enceladus, and other worlds. If there is life in the subsurface oceans of these moons, what responsibilities do we have to protect it and to avoid contaminating it with microorganisms from Earth? Should we even be exploring these worlds if there is a risk of causing harm to any life that might exist there? These are profound questions that humanity will need to address as we venture further into the solar system, and our experience in Antarctica can provide valuable lessons for how to approach these challenges. Beyond its scientific importance, Antarctica holds a special place in human culture and imagination. It is a symbol of the last frontier, a place that remains wild and untamed, largely untouched by human civilization. The very remoteness and harshness of Antarctica, the qualities that make it so challenging to explore, also make it a place of wonder and fascination. The vast ice sheets stretching to the horizon, the mountains rising from the frozen landscape, the otherworldly beauty of the aurora australis dancing in the polar sky, all of these images capture the imagination and inspire a sense of awe and humility. Antarctica reminds us that there are still places on Earth that are beyond our control, where nature reigns supreme and where we are visitors, not masters. The history of Antarctic exploration is filled with tales of heroism, endurance, and tragedy. The early explorers who ventured into this frozen wilderness faced unimaginable hardships, travelling on foot or by dog sled across the ice, battling blizzards and temperatures that could kill in minutes, and often running short of food and supplies. Many did not return, their lives claimed by the brutal conditions. The story of Robert Falcon Scott and his team, who reached the South Pole in 1912, only to find that the Norwegian explorer Roald Amundsen had beaten them there, and who perished on the return journey, is one of the most famous and tragic tales of exploration. Scott's final diary entries, written as he and his companions lay dying in their tent, trapped by a blizzard just miles from a supply depot, are a poignant testament to the human spirit and the desire to push beyond the limits of what is known and achievable. But the exploration of Antarctica has also been a story of international cooperation and scientific collaboration. The Antarctic Treaty, which was signed during the height of the Cold War, was a remarkable achievement that brought together nations with very different political systems and ideologies in a common commitment to peace and science. The treaty has been largely successful in preventing conflict over Antarctica and in promoting scientific research, and it stands as an example of what can be accomplished when nations work together toward a shared goal. Today, dozens of countries operate research stations in Antarctica, and scientists from around the world come together to conduct collaborative studies, share data, and work toward a better understanding of this unique continent and its role in the global environment. Antarctica also serves as a powerful symbol in discussions about climate change and environmental protection. The ice sheets of Antarctica are a visible indicator of the health of the planet and the changes that are occurring there. The melting of ice shelves, the acceleration of glaciers, the thinning of the ice sheet are stark reminders of the impacts of human activities on the Earth's climate. Images of calving glaciers and collapsing ice shelves have become iconic representations of climate change, used in documentaries, news reports, and advocacy campaigns to illustrate the urgency of the issue. At the same time, Antarctica represents a place that is still largely pristine, a benchmark against which we can measure the extent of human impact on the environment. Protecting Antarctica and preserving it for future generations has become a rallying cry for environmental movements, a goal that resonates with people around the world. As we look to the future, the exploration of Antarctica and the search for its lost world are poised to enter a new and exciting phase. Advances in technology, from robotics to artificial intelligence to genomics, are opening up new possibilities for discovery and for answering some of the most fundamental questions about Antarctica's history and its role in the Earth system. There are numerous missions being planned or already underway that aim to drill deeper into the ice, to explore more subglacial lakes, to map the bedrock in greater detail, and to search for signs of ancient life. Each of these missions has the potential to yield discoveries that could change our understanding of Antarctica and of Earth's history. One of the most ambitious projects currently being planned is the search for the oldest ice on Earth, ice that could be more than 1.5 million years old, and that could contain a record of Earth's climate stretching back further than any ice core that has been drilled so far. The oldest ice cores that have been analysed to date, from sites such as Dome C in East Antarctica, go back about 800,000 years, covering several cycles of ice ages and interglacial periods. But scientists believe that there are locations in Antarctica where the ice is much older, and that by drilling in these locations, they could extend the ice core record back to a time when Earth's climate was transitioning from one type of ice age cycle to another. This would provide invaluable information about how the climate system works and what factors drive long-term changes in temperature and atmospheric composition. The search for the oldest ice is a major international effort, involving researchers from many countries, and it will require the development of new drilling technologies and new methods for identifying the best locations to drill. Another exciting area of research is the use of autonomous underwater vehicles, or AUVs, to explore subglacial lakes. AUVs are robotic submarines that can be programmed to navigate through water without direct human control, using sensors and cameras to map the environment and collect data. By deploying AUVs in subglacial lakes, scientists could explore these hidden bodies of water in much greater detail than is possible with simple water sampling, potentially discovering features such as hydrothermal vents, sediment deposits, or even complex ecosystems. AUVs have already been used successfully in the Arctic, exploring under sea ice and mapping the ocean floor, and adapting this technology for use in subglacial lakes is a logical next step. The challenge is to develop AUVs that can be deployed through a borehole in the ice, and that can operate in the cold, dark, high-pressure environment of a subglacial lake, navigating obstacles and transmitting data back to the surface. There are also plans for more extensive geological and geophysical surveys of Antarctica, using aircraft and ground-based instruments to map the bedrock, identify volcanic features, and locate areas where the ice is thin or where there are interesting geological structures. These surveys will help scientists identify the best locations for future drilling and will improve our understanding of the tectonic and volcanic history of the continent. Some researchers are also interested in drilling through the ice and into the bedrock itself to collect samples of the rock and sediment that lie beneath the ice sheet. These samples could contain fossils, ancient soils, or other materials that would provide direct evidence of what Antarctica was like before the ice came. Drilling into the bedrock is technically challenging because it requires specialized equipment that can cut through both ice and rock, but it is an important goal for future missions. In addition to these scientific missions, there is also growing interest in the potential for tourism and education in Antarctica. While the number of tourists visiting Antarctica has increased in recent years, the vast majority of visitors only see a small fraction of the continent, primarily the Antarctic Peninsula and a few other easily accessible areas. There is potential for expanding educational programs that would allow more people to learn about Antarctica and to appreciate its importance, whether through virtual reality experiences, documentary films, or carefully managed visits to research stations and field sites. At the same time, there is a need to ensure that tourism is conducted in a responsible and sustainable manner, so that it does not harm the environment or interfere with scientific research. Balancing the desire for access and education with the need for protection and preservation is one of the ongoing challenges facing those who manage activities in Antarctica. One of the most important insights that has emerged from the study of Antarctica is the recognition of how interconnected Earth's systems are, and how changes in one part of the planet can have far-reaching effects on other regions. Antarctica is not an isolated continent, cut off from the rest of the world, but rather is intimately connected to the global climate, the ocean circulation, and the distribution of life on Earth. The ice sheet influences the climate by reflecting sunlight back into space, a process known as the albedo effect, which helps to keep the planet cool. The cold waters around Antarctica sink and flow northward along the ocean floor, forming part of the global ocean circulation system that transports heat, nutrients, and dissolved gases around the world. The ecosystems of Antarctica, from the microorganisms in subglacial lakes to the penguins and seals along the coast, are part of a global web of life that depends on the flow of energy and materials across the planet. When we talk about Antarctica's lost world, and the possibility that remnants of ancient ecosystems are preserved beneath the ice, we're also talking about a time when Earth's systems were very different from what they are today. The climate was warmer, the continents were in different positions, and the distribution of plants and animals was very different. Understanding how these systems functioned in the past can help us understand how they function today and how they might change in the future. For example, the transition from a green Antarctica to a frozen one was associated with major changes in ocean circulation, atmospheric composition, and global temperature. By studying this transition, scientists can learn about the feedback mechanisms that amplify or dampen climate change, such as the way that ice reflects sunlight and cools the planet, or the way that changes in vegetation affect the carbon cycle. The study of Antarctica also highlights the importance of thinking about Earth as a whole, as a single integrated system, rather than as a collection of separate and independent parts. What happens in Antarctica affects the rest of the world, and what happens in the rest of the world affects Antarctica. The greenhouse gases that are released by burning fossil fuels in North America, Europe, Asia, and elsewhere are contributing to the warming of the planet, and this warming is being felt in Antarctica through the melting of ice shelves and the acceleration of glaciers. The melting of Antarctica's ice sheet in turn is raising global sea levels and affecting coastal communities on every continent. This interconnectedness means that we all have a stake in what happens in Antarctica, and that the decisions we make about how we use energy, how we manage resources, and how we protect the environment have consequences that extend far beyond our immediate surroundings. As we have journeyed through the story of Antarctica's lost world, from the green forests and dinosaurs of the distant past to the frozen continent of today, from the subglacial lakes that may harbour life to the ice cores that preserve a record of Earth's climate, we have encountered themes that resonate deeply with the human experience. These themes include the passage of time and the impermanence of what we think of as fixed and unchanging, the resilience of life in the face of extreme challenges, the importance of curiosity, and the desire to explore and understand the world around us, and the responsibility we have to protect and preserve the natural environment for future generations. The story of Antarctica reminds us that our planet is constantly changing, that the landscapes and ecosystems we see today are just one frame in a much longer film that stretches back billions of years and will continue into the future. The forests that once covered Antarctica are gone, buried beneath miles of ice, but they are not forgotten, because their fossils remain as evidence of a world that once was. The ice sheet that covers Antarctica today will not last forever. If the climate continues to warm, it could eventually melt, transforming the continent once again. The challenge for humanity is to understand these changes, to anticipate them, and to make choices that will minimize harm and maximize the chances for a thriving planet in the future. The resilience of life in Antarctica, from the dinosaurs that once roamed its valleys to the microorganisms that live in subglacial lakes today, is a testament to the incredible adaptability of living organisms. Life finds a way, even in the most inhospitable environments, and this gives us hope that life on Earth can persist through the changes that are coming, as long as we are wise enough to give it the chance. The exploration of Antarctica has shown us that there are still mysteries to be solved, still frontiers to be crossed, and still discoveries to be made. In an age when it sometimes seems that everything has been explored and every question has been answered, Antarctica reminds us that there is still so much we do not know, and that the pursuit of knowledge is a never-ending journey. Finally, the story of Antarctica teaches us about responsibility. The Antarctic Treaty and the international cooperation that has made Antarctic research possible are examples of what humanity can achieve when we work together toward a common goal. But they are also reminders of the fragility of such agreements and the constant need for vigilance and commitment. The decisions we make today about how we explore Antarctica, how we respond to climate change, and how we protect the environment will shape the world that our children and grandchildren inherit. We have the power to preserve Antarctica as a place of wonder and discovery, or to allow it to be degraded and diminished. The choice is ours, and the time to act is now. As we conclude this journey through Antarctica's lost world, it is worth reflecting on the legacy of ice, both as a preserving force that has locked away evidence of the past, and as a dynamic force that continues to shape the planet. Ice is not just frozen water. It is a substance with unique properties that have profound effects on Earth's climate, geology, and biology. Ice expands when it freezes, which is why it floats on water and why it can crack rocks and carve valleys. Ice reflects sunlight, keeping the planet cool, and when it melts, it releases water that can raise sea levels and alter ocean currents. Ice can trap air, dust, pollen, and even living organisms, preserving them for millions of years. In all of these ways, ice is a key player in the story of Earth, and nowhere is this more evident than in Antarctica. The ice sheet of Antarctica is a monument to the power of accumulation, the result of millions of years of snowfall that has been compressed and transformed into a vast archive of Earth's history. It is also a reminder of the impermanence of all things, because the ice is always moving, always changing, always flowing from the interior of the continent toward the coast, where it breaks off into icebergs and melts into the sea. The ice sheet has grown and shrunk over time, responding to changes in the climate, and it will continue to do so in the future. The challenge for scientists is to understand these processes well enough to predict what will happen next. And the challenge for humanity is to respond in ways that minimize the impacts on people and ecosystems around the world. The legacy of ice is also a legacy of discovery. The ice cores drilled from Antarctica have provided some of the most important data about Earth's climate history, revealing the natural cycles of ice ages and interglacial periods, the relationship between greenhouse gases and temperature, and the speed and magnitude of past climate changes. The ice sheet has preserved fossils and other evidence of Antarctica's green past, allowing us to reconstruct ecosystems that existed millions of years ago. The ice has created unique environments such as subglacial lakes, where life may have persisted in isolation for eons. All of these discoveries have expanded our knowledge and deepened our appreciation for the complexity and beauty of the natural world. But perhaps the most important legacy of ice is the questions it raises about the future. What will happen to Antarctica as the planet continues to warm? How much of the ice sheet will melt and how fast? What will be the consequences for sea level, for ocean circulation, for ecosystems both in Antarctica and around the world? These are not just academic questions, but urgent practical ones that will affect billions of people. The answers will depend not only on the science, but also on the choices we make as a society about how we use energy, how we manage resources, and how we work together to address the challenges of a changing climate. The ice of Antarctica is a witness to the past and a harbinger of the future, and it is up to us to heed its message. As you drift now into the peaceful embrace of sleep, let the story of Antarctica's lost world linger in your mind, a tale of transformation and mystery, of life and ice, of past and future. Imagine the forests that once grew where now there is only ice, the dinosaurs that roamed through valleys that are now buried miles beneath the surface, the ancient rivers that carve their path through a landscape that no human eyes have ever seen. Imagine the microorganisms that may still be living in the dark, cold waters of subglacial lakes, isolated for millions of years, carrying on the legacy of life in one of the most extreme environments on Earth. Imagine the scientists who brave the harsh conditions to drill through the ice, to collect samples, to piece together the clues that tell us what Antarctica was like and what it might become. Antarctica's ice sheet is indeed a preservation chamber, a frozen vault that holds within it the secrets of a lost world. It is a library of Earth's history, with each layer of ice a page in a book that stretches back through millions of years. It is a laboratory where we can study the limits of life, the processes of climate change, and the connections between different parts of the Earth system. It is a symbol of the wild and untamed, a reminder that there are still places on our planet that are beyond human control, where nature reigns and where we are humbled by the scale and power of the forces at work. But Antarctica is also a mirror, reflecting back to us the consequences of our actions and the choices we face. The melting of the ice, the collapse of ice shelves, the acceleration of glaciers, these are not distant problems that will affect someone else in some far-off future. They are happening now, and they are the result of the greenhouse gases we have released into the atmosphere, the fossil fuels we have burned, the changes we have made to the land and the sea. The story of Antarctica's transformation from a green and living continent to a frozen wilderness is a reminder that climates can change, that ecosystems can collapse, and that the world we know can be fundamentally altered. But it is also a reminder that the Earth is resilient, that life is adaptable, and that there is still time to make different choices, to change course, to work together to protect and preserve the planet for future generations. As you close your eyes and let sleep wash over you, carry with you the wonder and the mystery of Antarctica, the knowledge that beneath the ice lies a world we are only beginning to understand, and the hope that through science, through cooperation, and through a commitment to protecting our planet, we can ensure that the secrets of Antarctica's lost world are preserved and that the legacy of ice continues to inspire and inform us for generations to come. Let the gentle rhythm of this story carry you into dreams of vast ice fields, ancient forests, hidden lakes, and the endless pursuit of knowledge that drives us to explore the farthest reaches of our world. Sleep now, and know that the frozen continent at the bottom of the Earth holds within it stories that are still being written, mysteries that are still being uncovered, and a legacy that belongs to all of humanity. Good night, and may your dreams be filled with the wonders of Antarctica's lost world.